Welcome back again to another riff on all things that are simply arising in this present moment here today. Today, what is sort of coming up for me is a kind of conversation surrounding energetical blockages, these sorts of traps that seem to siphon our attention, sort of lulling us into distraction, into addiction, and really draining us of our life force. You see, as these metabolically limited organisms, we only have so much energy throughout our day. We wake up in the morning, we feel nice and refreshed, and we go to sleep because we feel tired, and we have this, very basic impulse to oscillate between rest and activity. Now, when we are in a state of activity, a state of wakefulness, when we're waking up and seizing the day, we want to go about our day with a sense of discernment. We don't want to waste time in pursuits which are not really serving us on a deep, soulful level. Now, I would argue that a lot of the time that many of us use doing certain things, getting lost in certain things, getting distracted. A lot of that time is wasted. A lot of that time is spent in activities that do not serve us. They're really these sort of energetical traps, as I may call them. They do not really add to our sense of meaning in life. Really, they take away from it. And, one of the most prominent energetical traps is something that is so intimate to us is our smartphones. You see, our smartphones, they can be these sort of portals to so much information and enlightenment, yet they can also, if used unwisely, take us down into laziness, into addiction, into doom scrolling. If we don't use our devices consciously, it will use us ultimately. You know. So what I'm trying to really advocate here is not just the mindful use of technologies, but the mindful awareness of where your attention is being oriented to in this very moment. You see, that is the essence of meditation. In the initial stages, the central insight that people often garner from meditation is just how distracted the mind is. It has this innate tendency to lose itself in wondering about the future, about the past, memories, and whatnot, and anything other than the present moment, anything other than what is here right now. If I'm to introspect myself in this very moment, I'm very grounded in this present here and now. I'm kind of flowing with it, I'm dancing with it. And that is a mode of consciousness that I aim to cultivate and ground myself in throughout my day. If I catch myself thinking about the future or thinking about the past, it is done in a deliberate manner. You know, meditation shouldn't teach one to dismiss the past and the future as unreal. There is a certain unreality to them because they are not here in the now. But we should understand that the past was then a now, a moment, and the future will be a moment when it is experienced. Of course, we only ever experience this sort of moving moment, this present experience which has this element of flow and change. And we change, the environment changes, and that's just how it cycles. But to not get overly philosophical and keep us grounded in this central task of being mindful throughout the day. Being mindful throughout the day requires confronting the habits that we have, which, these comfort mechanisms. You see, many people find this sort of this illusory sense of comfort through just scrolling through their phone, just distracting from themselves from the moment and just scrolling. And indeed, many sort of social media algorithms, they are very much designed like a slot machine at a casino to provide these intermittent reward cycles for your brain that are very dopaminergically addictive. You'll be scrolling and scrolling, and suddenly you'll get a flash of a post that interests you, that the algorithm has learnt, you know, consistently seem to interest you and consistently, attains engagement from you. And you have to understand that, like, the more you use a social media algorithm device, the more data that you are providing it, the more information about yourself that you are willingly, whether consciously or unconsciously, you are willingly giving up that information by the manner in which you use that device. Now, many people, they do not have this consciousness of the way in which they are using their social media apps and the privacy that they are giving up. Of course, most people don't read the privacy policies. I myself don't, but I'm aware of, you know, implicitly aware at least of the privacy that I am giving up by using these devices. However, if you understand, the way in which this algorithm is, reading you and adapting itself to you, um, you can then begin to catch yourself more when you are just aimlessly scrolling. Aimlessly scrolling. I mean, TikTok is a pretty um, potent example of this aimless scrolling. It sort of takes you into this zombified state. I've seen it happen to people. They almost dissociate a bit from the outside world and are totally, you know, just totally enwrapped in their phone and in this scrolling motion, and they'll watch for a little bit this clip, whether they'll like it or whatever, and they just continue scrolling, and then that is their state of consciousness, um, and it seems as though they nothing else beyond the phone, beyond those, that reward cycle of swiping and swiping, nothing else really matters, or nothing else really, um, elicits any pleasure or curiosity or interest in their brain. I mean, I suppose when you look at it this way, these social media apps, they're very, they're almost designed to addict you, and many people do become addicted to it. Of course, there is some distinction between a social media addiction compared to a drug addiction, for example. But there are a lot of similarities, a lot of important similarities, particularly in how it sort of takes over, the dopamine reward circuitry of your brain to the point where you no longer find interest or curiosity or reward in things outside of your phone and your social media apps. So, I mean, I've talked at length about social media because I think it is a major, time and attention sink for most people nowadays, including myself. Of course, I use social media for work, but I do find myself, you know, wasting more time than I perhaps need to, and almost developing this sort of reflexive habit of checking my phone and having my attention orient to the screen, and the screen becomes the reality, when of course there is a much deeper reality beyond the screen. And it's important to speculate on what is this doing to the consciousness of society as a whole. All of these addiction devices just there in people's phones. Currently, it seems that the 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 orienting mythos of technology, or the development of technology, is towards profit, is towards money. This is why social media apps, they're optimizing for engagement, optimizing for eyeballs, so that your eyes will be on the phone when an advertisement is shown, and then hopefully you'll click on that advertisement and buy the product. Um, Importantly, there's a difference between optimizing for profit and optimizing for, say, you know, enlightenment or deepened awareness or this or that thing, or you know. And of course, when you have an app which is optimizing for profit by um, the proxy of maximizing engagement, there are obviously going to be side effects of that, on an individual level and also on a collective level. Maybe we're all, these phones are just driving us all insane. But that's I suppose, a boomer-ish remark to say. I think, in summary, technology can be wielded for good, and it can also be wielded unwisely and used for nefarious intentions. This is a pretty perennial sort of remark about the relationship between humans and technology, particularly new technologies. Um, but I suppose, as individuals, right, we can we can only really affect change most directly at our own life, our own individual scale. Um, when we start, zooming out to these wider sociological problems, it can get a bit distant and abstract, which is important to talk about, but it's important to bring it back down to the scale of your own life, and how do you yourself relate to technologies and your phone and the way you are spending your time. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself currently, and this requires a degree of honesty. You have to ask yourself, am I using my phone or my technological devices? Am I using them to serve my higher self or my higher soul needs? Or am I using them as these distraction tools to distract myself from my life, to sort of numb myself? Um, and of course, people can use devices for both reasons. They can use it both to enlighten themselves and also to numb themselves. So you have to discuss within yourself, what is the balance? What is the balance that you are currently doing? And when you come to that sort of judgment, and an honest judgment as well, it's easy to live in denial of your bad habits, because it's more difficult to really see your own flaws. Um, I think there's nothing wrong with seeing one's own flaws. In fact, it is a necessary component of growth and health. In fact, I think it makes you more powerful if you can honestly acknowledge that your imperfections, because obviously we all have them, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but yeah, after sort of acknowledging your relationships with technology, then you have to sort of make the adjustment phase. What sort of changes do you implement into your life in order to not be so, exposed to the toxicities, I suppose, of excessive technology use. And this can be as simple as, doing other things, going out in nature, touching some trees, playing music if that's something that interests you, or simply being still with yourself. I think much of our technological use with our phones, whether we're waiting at bus stops for a bus or anything, any idle activity, um, it's often in those idle moments where we do reflexively take out our phone and scroll. And now, of course, we can do that in our idle moments, or we could perhaps use our idle moments to simply sit in silence and not do anything. Now, our culture seems to have this sort of profound reluctance to um, engage in stillness, to simply not doing anything. It's almost as though we are conditioned to have this neurotic need to constantly be doing something. And this leads to a very restless and agitated culture, I suppose. We're all filled with this inner emptiness, this inner dissatisfaction that we have to remedy with action. But of course, there is no action that solves this. The only action that will solve this inner restlessness is paradoxically non action. It is stillness. It is simply sitting with yourself and seeing whatever arises. That is really the action, or the non action, the effortless action. But yeah, I think I'll leave that at that. If that's been interesting and insightful, contact me on Instagram if you're interested in my mentoring service, and have an amazing rest of your day.